All rise.
All rise.
Joseph Caribbean, come just.
Please take your seats. Caribbean Court of Justice Appellate Jurisdiction on appeal from the Court of Appeal of Guyana. The following three appeals have been guided for pretrial review this morning. They are as follows. CCJ Appeal number 9 of 2019 between Christopher Ram versus the Attorney General of Guyana, the leader of the opposition, Joseph Harmon, and Guyana Election Commission. CCJ Appeal number 10 of 2019 between Bharat Jagdeo, the Attorney General of Guyana, Dr. Barton Scotland, Joseph Harmon, and the Guyana Elections Commission. CCJ Appeal number 11 of 2019 between Charandas Prasad versus Compton Herbert Reed, Dr. Barton Scotland, the Attorney General of Guyana, Bharat Jagdeo, Joseph Harmon, and Guyana Election Commission. Can we have the appearances for the court, please? Thank you.
May it please your honors, Kamal Rampuran for the appellant Christopher Ram.
May it please your honors, Sanjeev Datadin for the appellant Charandas Prasad.
May it please your honors. Pastor Williams, Attorney General, with Ms. Iman Courtney for the Attorney General. May it please your honors, Neil Boston with Mr. Robert Courtney for Compton Reed.
Just a minute, I didn't get that appearance.
Neil Boston
Neil Boston, yes.
with Mr. Robert Courtney for Mr. Compton Reed to respond.
May it please your honors, Dr. Khan, I appear for Dr. Barton Scotland, whose second name is responded in civil appeal in CCJ appeals number 10 and 11 of 2019.
Please, your honors, I appear for...
Just a minute. Can I get the appearance again for Mr. Scotland?
Dr. Khan, appearing for Dr. Barton Scotland.
Saying it. Royce Ford for the added respondent Joseph Harmon.
Who's this? Mr. Ford, yes.
Yes, your honor.
May it please your honors, Excellence Data, on behalf of the Guyana Elections Commission, the added respondent.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Ms. Dazzle. Yes, please, your honors.
Yes.
Excellence Dazzle, on behalf of the Guyana Elections Commission.
Yes, Ms. Dazzler. Okay. If you please, you will. Just a second. Yes.
Mr. Douglas Mendez leads me, Devish Maraj, Mr. Mohabir Anil Nandalal, Mr. C.V. Satram, and instructed by Ms. Candice Barrett. For the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Bharat Jagdeo.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Counsel. My understanding was that the written submissions were received on behalf of Mr. Jagdeo, Mr. Charandas Prasad, Mr. Ram, the Attorney General, Mr. Reed, Mr. Harmon, the Guyana Electoral Commission. Is that correct? Is there anybody who made written submissions whose name is not mentioned here?
Your Honor, if I may, the Guyana Elections Commission did not make any submissions, sir. It will be abided by the orders of the court.
I see. Okay. So the Guyana Elections Commission will not be making oral submissions.
No, please, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you for that. But my listing of the various submissions is correct. There isn't anybody who I omitted to mention. Is that the case?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. We wish to hear this matter from 9 a.m. in the morning. We want to proceed until maybe about 4 o'clock at the very latest. And we will have a 40-minute break for lunch and 2 breaks for about 15 minutes, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. Now, the written submissions that have been submitted are full, detailed, and there really is little need for extensive oral advocacy. We proposed that, because these are consolidated matters, that counsel for Mr. Jagdeo, Mr. Prasad, and Mr. Ram will follow each other in that order, and that would be followed, their submissions would be followed by counsel for the Attorney General, for Mr. Reid, and for Mr. Harmon. Now, the Attorney General is has submitted a cross appeal. So what we would expect is that when counsel for Mr. Jagdeo, Messrs. Jagdeo, Charandas Prasad, and Mr. Ram begin their submissions, when they make their submissions, they will address the matters on the cross appeal as well as the matters which constitute their own appeal. And after we hear from the respondents, the AG, Mr. Reid, Mr. Harmon, we would allow counsel for Mr. Jagdeo, Mr. Prasad, and Mr. Ram a period to respond, and thereafter, similarly, we would allow counsel for the Attorney General, for Mr. Reid and Mr. Harmon, also to respond. These are the timelines that we are proposing. Mr. Mendez for Mr. Jagdeo. First of all, before I outline these time periods, I should say that when we looked at the written submissions, there are naturally significant areas of overlap, and we didn't think that it was necessary to give everybody equal time, but that it appeared to us that both on the part of the appellants and on the part of the respondents, there appeared to be lead counsel, so to speak, counsel whose submissions were more extensive, and therefore we proposed that both in respect of Mr. Mendez and Mr. Courtney, we would allot you 1 hour. So we had in mind Mr. Mendez for Mr. Jagdeo, 1 hour from 9 to 10, followed by, I assume, Mr. Datadin for Mr. Prasad, 30 minutes, followed by Mr. Ram Karan for Mr. Ram, 30 minutes. That would take us up to 11 o'clock. And then we take a break for 15 minutes, from 11 to 11:15. And then we would hear from Mr. Courtney, and we would allot him 1 hour. And then we would hear from counsel for Mr. Reid. I assume that that is going to be Mr. McKay. I'm not sure. Is that correct?
No, that's going to be Mr. Boston.
That is going to be whom?
Mr. Boston.
Mr. Boston. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's right.
12:15.
Right. After we hear from Mr. Courtney, we will take lunch at 12:15. And then we will hear at 1 o'clock from Mr. Reed's counsel, who I gather is Mr. Boston, from 1 to 1:30. And then from Mr. Ford, from Mr. Harmon, from 1:30 to 2. Now we have to do a little bit of an adjustment here because we're not going to hear from counsel for GCOM. So Mr. Mendez would then be allowed 15 minutes to respond. That would be from 2 to 2:15. And then, is it then that we have the break? We have a short break until 2:30. And then we hear from Mr. Dattadin from 2:30 to 2:45. Then from Mr. Ramkaran from 2:45 to 3. And then the respondents would have their final go at it. Mr. Courtney from 3 to 3:15.
It's on the cross appeal?
Yes, to reply to the cross appeal response. Mr. Boston from 3:15 to 3:30. And then Mr. Ford from 3:30 to 3:45. Now, naturally, if among you, you wish to cede some of your time to one of your colleagues, then that is fine with us. The idea is, if we go over it from the top, that the appellants all told will have 2 hours to present their appeal. The respondents will have 2 hours to present both. Well, the appellants will not only be presenting their appeal, but they will also be making their preliminary submissions on the cross appeal, which they would have seen. The respondents would have 2 hours both to present their submissions in response to the appeal as well as to present their submissions on the cross appeal. And then each side, the appellants as a whole and the respondents as a whole, will have 45 minutes each to make their respective replies. Is there anything that is unclear?
No, Your Honor.
No, sir.
Your Honors, there isn't anything that's unclear, but having seen the other side's very detailed submissions, running in, as you will have seen, to in excess of 300 pages, and the voluminous number of authorities. I am cautioning that the time that you have allotted may be too short, and having regard to how things, having regard in particular, quite apart from the voluminous papers that are before you, the fact is that there are a number of issues that have to be traversed, very important ones about the Constitution of Guyana. And the 1 hour that you have allotted to me, for example, I fear will be eaten up very quickly. if only in a discussion that I expect will be had with the court on a number of these issues. So the way things operate, I suspect that before long, or before I get too far into the issues that I might want to cover, my hour will be up. The suggestion is that you allocate an additional day, maybe the Monday, the following Monday, or if not, if the Monday and Tuesday are convenient, then maybe you fix them for Monday and Tuesday instead of the Friday, so that you can give each of us a little more time to address the various issues. Quite apart from the question of what is the majority of 65, you have issues concerning the jurisdiction of the court to entertain questions concerning disqualification outside of the election petition period. You have questions concerning what is a vote of confidence, what is the effect of Article 156.3, what is the effect of Article 165.2, that is the article that seeks to validate proceedings, what is the extent of the doctrine of necessity to save invalid votes if you do find the votes are invalid, what is the reach of the de facto doctrine in these circumstances if again you find that the vote is invalid. So there are a number of issues that need to be explored in some detail, which I think although the parties did their best on both sides to address these issues, we really haven't done so in great detail, partly because of, I think, the shortness of the period of time that we had to address them in written submissions. Let me put it this way, if I had had more time, I probably would have had a lot more to say on, certainly on those issues, the de facto doctrine, the doctrine of necessity, and so on. As it is, we have certainly only been able to deal with them very briefly. So that I'm just anticipating, again,
Yes,
from experience
and
and from the number of
that.
issues, that we will all be hard pressed to cover the ground within that short period of time.
Yes.
On the other hand, we will have your written submissions, and so there's no point in you just really orally going over what's already there. It's just a question of highlighting certain features, best features, in your 30 or 40 pages submissions on a particular point.
I appreciate that, Your Honor, but as it happens, even when you're seeking only to highlight and you're assuming that everything has been read, the discussion tends to become very interesting.
This is Your Honor, Kamal Ramkaran.
Just hold on, please, Mr. Ramkaran. We'll come back to you.
Certainly, Madam.
Okay, she said if we could start on the 9th.
It's the day before CCJ
Yeah.
3 days.
It's not the 9th of 3, isn't it?
Yes, Mr. Ramkaran.
Those of us from Guyana, Your Honors, have already booked our flights and made our arrangements, and it will cause us considerable hardship if the time were to be extended. For example, I have to leave Trinidad and go to a third country. Perhaps it may be more prudent to allow those who wish to make additional submissions in the intervening period between today and the 10th of May to do so, to say what they want to say, so that the oral submissions can be kept within the timelines that Your Honors have suggested.
Okay. Suppose we began this case on the 9th, so that we could hear submissions on the 9th and the 10th. Would anybody be very seriously inconvenienced?
That would be convenient, Your Honor.
That would be convenient for the Attorney General, and I just wish to associate myself with the points made by Mr. Mendes.
Yes. So it seems as though nobody would be terribly inconvenienced. Well, none of you would be terribly inconvenienced if we began on the 9th. And I appreciate the points made by Mr. Mendes, which have been supported by Mr. Courtney. this is an important case. It raises some very interesting constitutional issues. And while we don't want counsel to, to prolong the oral argument, nevertheless, it is in our own interest that we should not stifle you from fully developing points which you've made in writing. So we will take the decision to do this case on the 9th, start on the 9th. We could start at 10 a.m. on the 9th because we have a full day, the preceding day on the 8th when we do the other matters, Zulfikar Mohammed. So if we started on the 9th, same order of speeches. If we tried for 2 hours, let's see how far that gets us. Mr. Mendez would be from 9 to 11.
10.
10 to 12.
10 to 12.
10 to 12, sorry. 10 to 12.
Break for lunch.
We can have lunch then.
Why, it's too early?
Or maybe have the next person, yeah. Mr. Datadin from 12 to 1. Or Mr. Datadin, let's say 12 to 12:45.
Respectfully, Brother, we would appreciate if the court could afford us 1 hour.
Okay, let's try 12 to 1 for the time being. 12 to 1.
Thank you kindly, sir.
No, this is just preliminary. We haven't made the order yet.
Yes, if you're repeating what had earlier been said, you'll be closed down.
And then we have a break for lunch for 1 to 1:40. So, Mr. Ram, you'll be Mr. Ramkran, that's 1:40 to 2:40. Mr. Courtney, you have 2 hours.
Does he want to start then or in the
No, 12 to 1, 2:40, we'll be out for 140 minutes. Maybe we take a 15-minute break. And then we hear Mr. Courtney from, it would be, let's say 3, from 3 to 5. And that'll be it for the 9th. Then on the 10th, we have Mr. Boston from 9 to 10. Mr. Ford from 10 to 11.
And a break.
And then a break. So we're at 11:15 now. Then we have Mr. Mendez from 11:15 to, how much time you want in response, Mr. Mendez?
2 hours, Well, I guess if we are doubling, it would be, I think, half an hour.
Half an hour to 11:45. Mr. Prasad from 11:45.
That's Datadin for Bazaar.
That's Mr. Datadin. That's 12:15. And then we have a break. Come back at 1 o'clock. Mr. Ramkaran from 1.
1:30.
To 1:30. And then Mr. Courtney from 1:30. Oops. Mr. Boston from 2 to 2:30. And Mr. Ford from 2:33. Okay, so shall I go over that? Mr. Mendez on the 9th of May from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. Mr. Datadin from 12 noon to 1. We take a break for lunch. Mr. Ramkaran from 1:40 to 2:40. Mr. Courtney from 3 to 5. And then we adjourn until the following day. Then we hear from Mr. Boston from 9 to 10 in the morning. Then Mr. Ford from 10 to 11. And then the replies, Mr. Mendez from 11:15 to 11:45. Mr. Datadin from 11:45 to 12:15. And then we take lunch. Then Mr. Ramkaran from 1 to 1:30, sorry. And then Mr. Courtney from 1:30 to 2. Mr. Boston from 2 to 2:30. And Mr. Ford from 2:30 to 3. Okay, so that's the order, and those are the timelines. As I said, if council wish to reallot their time, then that's fine. Is there anything else that we need to?
Yes, Your Honor. Thus far, we've only filed lists of authorities, and none of the authorities themselves have been filed. I noticed that there has been some overlap in the authorities, so I was wondering if you would suggest maybe one of the appellants. We would certainly take on that responsibility if you think that's appropriate, to gather together all of the lists, all of the cases, and submit one filing of the cases from all of the parties, which we can all then rely on.
Each of the parties submitted their own list.
That's right.
But then they were overlapping naturally.
That's correct.
Right. So what we want is for the appellants to submit one set of authorities. And similarly for the respondents to submit one set of authorities. So that would require...
Your Honor.
Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest maybe what Mr. Mendez suggested would be better, because the respondents also rely on quite a lot of the same authorities. So if we can just collate the list, make them into one list of authorities, and then one appellant can take the file, all of that on behalf of everyone. taking out all the overlaps. And we're all referring to the weekly law reports, to the All England reports, all the same report.
Right, so that the appellants will constitute their one set, and respondents similarly. And no, I know, and then they will put both together to eliminate overlap. And you're suggesting that the appellants take the responsibility of submitting the final set. Is that it?
No, so that's what Mr. Mendes suggested.
Sorry, I didn't get you, Mr. Courtney.
Sorry, I thought that was what Mr. Mendes suggested.
Maybe, but I had understood him differently. But your suggestion seems to make more sense than what I had originally understood. So that there's just one set of authorities that would be submitted.
Which would incorporate all of the authorities relied on by all of the parties.
Exactly.
6 in all, yes. But ensuring that there's no overlap.
Exactly. And that the appellants will assume that responsibility.
That's
now,
correct.
It would mean that the respondents would have the onus of providing their list to their consolidated list to the appellants in a timely fashion.
Yes, yes. And also the cases, because some of them we so far have not been able to obtain copies of. So they will send their copies to us. We will put it together in one master list, as it were, with their agreement, then submit it to the court. The list and the authorities attached.
We can, speaking for the Attorney General, we can do that by Friday of this week.
Okay, thank you. What's the date on Friday? By May 1st, yeah.
Authorities by May 1st.
Okay, so the respondents will submit to the appellants their list of authorities and the authorities themselves by the 26th of April. And the appellants will file a comprehensive list of authorities and the authorities themselves by 1st of May. Is that okay?
Yes, that is.
Sorry, I didn't get that? Okay. All right.
Your Honor,
yes.
just to clarify, and I think you said it just now, but we need to make clear that when the appellants are sending their authorities and their list, they will send it to the appellants. Sorry, when the respondents are sending theirs, they should send it to the appellant, but do not file it and upload it on the system.
Exactly. You don't file it because then it will just be duplication, possible duplication. So that's a matter just between yourself and the appellants. And the appellants will file a comprehensive list and which will serve on the respondents.
Yes. Mr. Mendes, did I hear you right that you all will undertake?
Yes, we will.
As you represent the leader of the opposition?
That's correct, yeah.
So the appellant then in 01010
That's
of
correct.
2019?
Yes, we'll take on the responsibility of gathering all of the authorities from all of the other parties.
Okay, fine.
Including the other appellants, of course.
Including the other appellants,
yes. Okay. Is there anything else?
There is one other issue that has arisen, Your Honor.
Yes, Mr. Doctor.
We have learned from the press that there is a sitting of Parliament on the 26th of April, and the schedule is to pass legislation to do things related to finance. and more importantly, to pass legislation in relation to companies in the oil and gas sector. Now, having regard to what is before the court and what are the implications of the one way or the other of the vote of December 21st, it's our respectful submission that that should be refrained from. We have not made a specific application to the court because we intended to raise it with the court and solicit from the Attorney General if necessary an undertaking. Failing which, Your Honor, we will file an urgent application that sit-in should not take place.
Well, I would not want to comment on that unless there's an application before the court.